being that the only thing the council can do is fully fund the school board, just as has been articulated repeatedly, working with the board to see what needs to be done, where it needs to be done, and making sure that it gets done. Also working with our community members as well to get them on board to work with our school district. And when I say that, that turns into advocacy and that turns into more resources, because you can get citizen-led initiatives that can help repair some of the issues with our buildings. I mean, because we have a lot of groups that's grassroots, that's willing to do work to help repair a lot of issues in our community. If we can just do more collaboration and support these citizen-led initiatives, and we can get the carpenters, and we can get the HVAC, and we can get resources that can collaborate with the budget, it can offset some of the costs. Huntington is one of those issues, and I know that it was money allocated for Huntington's repair at one point, but for some reason it was never taken care of throughout the years. I would love to see repair work done with Huntington High School. My grandparents graduated in 1952. It is a historic landmark, and that's a school that shouldn't be closing its doors and redistricting our students outside of the community. But I think it's more of a collaborative spirit that needs to occur.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Chair.
Thank you for your question. And I do know that the school board also has their capital improvement plan, just as the city has its capital improvement plan. And so when they bring that to us, we do consider and try to fund what they ask for in their capital improvement plan, which would include their buildings as well. And even as we're talking about with the school board meeting with city council to talk about the operating budget, that's another budget that we could talk about as well and try to come to some collaboration as to what we can fund and how we can fund it and how we can get it done. So none of our buildings are falling down or they're not falling into disrepair.
Great, thank you. Ms. Scott?
Based on the figures that our budget director gave us at the last few meetings, the schools are actually getting 33% of the city's operating budget. I don't know how much more we can get out of that. But I think that we're going to have to be creative. And what I've tasked our city manager with doing is to see how other people funded their schools. Norfolk built the schools this year. Last year, I think Chesapeake, a couple of the other neighboring, we call them the 7 cities. There are at least 3 or 4 of the 7 cities. They built new schools last year. So, you know, the cities usually follow best practices. So I think it's time for us to look at how we can get that done. And otherwise, if we can't figure out how they're doing it, then the only way to get it done is to increase taxes, which you heard all about fiscal conservatives here at the table. They're saying they're not going to raise the taxes, but you know, 1 penny increase on the revenue taxes equals to $1 million. So it would take some time to get all of the aging infrastructure rebuilt. And right now we have several schools that are, I think, more than 50 years old. And Warwick, there's already a discussion about Warwick, and you know, but we have to be penny wise. We have to build to meet the needs of the community where those schools are actually housed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bethany.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, the question relates to the aging infrastructure, the school infrastructure. There are 42 school buildings in the school system right now. Of those, 27 were built before 1970. 3 of those were actually built before 1939. There have been only 2 buildings, new school buildings, built since the year 2000. And there's a lot of discussion around the city about what might be a looming infrastructure problem with our schools. How do you propose that we address this?
If I'm not mistaken, in the school's capital improvement plan, isn't it the school system's responsibility to allocate those funds when it's time to, whether it's replacing HVACs or whether it's time to rebuild a school? So however, I would support the school system in making sure that the funds are there as long as they're proposing and as long as they're staying on top of it.
Okay. Ms. Reason.
So I'm thinking about this question in 2 different ways. The first way is as a financial analyst. And prior to planning a budget, research is supposed to be done. Meaning you should go into the school systems, you hire professionals to say what needs to be done and how much that will cost. Then you go back to council and say, this is what's needed, and you prioritize that to start with the schools that are of higher priority. So as a council member, my first question would be, is that being done to get a proper estimate of the funds that's needed? The second way that I would answer that is, as a Newport News previous student, I went to Warwick High School, and I can remember having holes in the ceiling and trash bags that hung over top of the lockers, and having to leave school early because we didn't have proper heating and proper air. So I think about it that way. So we have to make sure that we have a safe environment for our students and for our staff. When that is not done, the city is actually losing money, because then you have problems like Huntington High School that we're on the point of it closing down because something wasn't properly allocated, maybe research wasn't properly done. So we're losing community schools because of situations like that.
Thank you, Mr. Roth.
You know, our students are our future, and we need to invest in them today. The school board does have their own capital improvement plan, and they present that yearly to the city council, and the council takes a look at it. So, yes, that's I would support any capital improvement to improve the school system. Maintenance up.
Okay, Mr. Reed.
For me, this is really a personal issue. I mean, I have friends, I have students that I know that work and kind of go to school in all these different areas, and not just Huntington Middle, but Warwick High School, and a lot of these schools are aging. This is a council issue, but it's also a board issue that really needs to kind of figure out how they're better allocating funds. But this goes also to a bigger point that we really need to look at how we're getting this money, and how the state and federal government is allocating money, and really need to push for that. You know, we need to kind of go to Richmond and kind of really kind of push for that idea of building the schools in the city much stronger. This is something that needs to be worked on. It needs to be improved, because what's happening to Huntington next year, the closing of Huntington Middle School, is something that is on the horizon for many, many different schools in the system, not just Warwick, but elementary schools and other things. And it needs to be looked at sooner than later, or we're going to have kids that are going to have a lot of the same issues that Ms. Reason had, not going to school in a safe kind of environment where they're not able to get to school because of heating or cooling issues.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
I agree that we do need more state resources here in Newport News for our schools. The school support from the state was cut during the Great Recession. It's never been fully restored. It's one of the reasons I worked hard to elect people to our legislature last year that would help bring tax dollars back to the local community for the schools. If you look at our budget, our capital improvement budget in Newport News, 22% of our budget goes to the schools. If you want to compare us to other cities in this region, Hampton, it's 30%, Norfolk, it's 47%, Virginia Beach, it's 38%, Suffolk is 42%, and Chesapeake is 35.9%. That's the problem. It's not that we're not getting more money from Richmond, it's that we're not allocating the money that we currently have in the right direction to make sure that our schools are taken care of. And the more we put off maintenance problems now, the more those problems are going to grow. For 16 years, I worked for a home builder. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to construction, and I know I have seen many times on a house where if repairs are not done promptly, because they can't be afforded, they are going to get worse, and they're going to be much more expensive in the long run. We owe it to our taxpayers to do the most economical thing possible, and that is to put money where it needs to be to make our schools to maintain our schools the way they should be.
Thank you, Ms. Penny.
I work on my budget every year, and you have to go line by line, and I'm sure the school budget does the same thing when they're looking at their capital improvement and how much money that they need to improve. The legislature, we can also go to them and ask for some more allocation in refurbishing our schools. We have a great building maintenance department that does construction and takes care of our buildings the best that they can with the budgets that they have. So going outside and hiring independent companies, that's more money wasted of our tax money to bring somebody in to reevaluate these schools to see what kind of improvement they need. But I think the school budget, they put it in line by line item, and they know what they're asking for. They've just got to allocate it correctly when the budget's approved and given back to them.
All right, just a really quick follow-up question, and it'll start with Ms. Wallace since it's a follow-up. Huntington is going to close next year. It's a civically, historically important building in Newport News. There's a lot of interest in immediately finding a solution to Huntington. Is that a city problem, or is it just the school board's problem? Should the city council find a way to address the issue of Huntington Middle School?
I feel it's a school board problem, but I feel like the city council can work with the school board members to find a solution. Again, collaboration is key, and you have to lead by example. If you want the citizens in the community to work together and to find solutions for challenges that they're facing, we also need to do the same thing as public servants and elected officials and representatives. So I feel like the council can work with the board to find solutions. That way we don't have to bus our students outside of the district.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cherry?
I think that we really do have to work with the school board to see how we can come up with a solution. I'm not happy about Huntington closing. That is my alma mater. I do believe that we have to rebuild Huntington. I advocate for that very strongly. I believe that it is a problem not only for the city, but it's also a problem for the school board. As we look at transforming and community transformation for the South District, people will come into the community when they have good schools. And so I think we have to look at how can we come up with a solution between the city council and the school board resolving Huntington.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Scott?
Ultimately, it becomes a city problem, and when it becomes a city problem, it becomes a citizen problem, because if we cannot generate the revenue to pay cash for the school, we have to issue bonds. That increases our debt service. But in a perfect world, I would like for them to have kept us informed of maintenance so that it wouldn't have had to abruptly close it, and then maybe we could have done some transitional building instead of now having to like totally rebuild from scratch. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bethany?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, it's just really about Huntington specifically.
Right.
It's historic, it's civically important, it's important to a lot of people. There's a strong interest in immediately rebuilding Huntington. Is that a city problem, city council problem? Is it just a school board problem, or is it some combination of those?
I think it's a combination of those. Yeah, I think that just answers your question.
Okay.
I didn't know, everybody else was going
That's good.
in great detail.
Thank you. Ms. Reason?
It's a collaborative problem. Initially, it may start off as being a school board problem, but that in turn leads to city council, that in turn leads to the citizens of Newport News. One thing that I want to point out is that right now in Newport News, we are already understaffed as it pertains to bus drivers. So we have to think about what that's going to look like to have to bus children from one part of the town to another part of town. Also, we need to look at, in downtown Newport News, a lot of the families don't have transportation. So how will they be able to get to their children in case of an emergency, in case they want to visit the schools? Those are the type of things that we have to consider, which is why it will be a community problem.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roth?
I believe there is a solution, and ultimately it is a city problem, citywide problem. Again, the two sides, the city council and the school board, need to come together.
Mr. Reed?
I also believe this is a city problem. This isn't just a school board problem. This isn't just a city council problem. This is a city problem. Huntington Middle School is an important pillar of the Southeast community, and as a lot of people have already talked about, there are kids that go to that school and that they walk to, and if you're going to now take these children next year, the plan is to take them to Crittenden and Hines. You're busing them out of the area where their parents can get to them. This is something I really feel like it has to be commitment from the council and the board and the entire city to get rebuilt by 2022.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkins?
I believe it's a citywide problem. I believe the city council should work with the school board before this to where it didn't reach this point. I think it's important for that community to have Huntington Middle School rebuilt as quickly as possible. And it comes down to a matter of trust. We have to assure each part of this city that we truly are one city, and we're working together for the success of the entire city. We care about each other's projects. And I know how important Huntington Middle School is to that community.
Great, thank you. Ms. Penny?
Yes, I believe it is a citywide problem, and I think the school board and the city council do need to come together and join forces and get the school built as soon as possible. I've been working with the alumni, with Huntington High School, and I think that we need to save a portion of that building when they tear it down, whether it be the library or whether it be the auditorium, and make that a museum for the alumni so they can still have something to go back and look at all of their artifacts that they grew up with and can show their grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
All right, thank you. The next question is going to